Have you ever looked at your digital wallet? Like maybe you're just standing in line, right? You're tapping your phone to buy a coffee, or you're reading some headline about the relentless push for a totally cashless society, and you just wonder, for a fleeting second, are we accidentally building the exact financial system predicted in ancient apocalyptic prophecies?
Oh man, it is an arresting image. I mean, we completely take the frictionlessness of modern technology for granted, right?
Yeah, total.
But when you zoom out, that convenience is actually brushing right up against these really ancient texts that describe total, inescapable economic control.
Right. And I think about it every time, my phone scans my face to authorize a payment. You just tap the screen, the biometric check clears, the money moves, and you don't even think about it.
You don't think about it at all.
Exactly. But when you pause and actually look at the underlying architecture that makes that single transaction possible, well, that brings us to the core mission for this deep dive today. So today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating academic paper by Michael R. Williams. He's from the College of Business at Governor State University. And it's titled Mark of the Beast, or Hype of the Beast, Examining Historical Patterns and Future Trends of Christian Eschatological Financial Control.
And, while that title sounds inherently provocative, and it is, the paper itself is this incredibly rigorous piece of academic finance scholarship.
Oh, absolutely.
Williams is really stepping past the theology to ask a very specific operational question. He's asking, has modern financial technology actually made the globally binding exclusionary economic system described in the Book of Revelation operational feasible for the very first time in human history?
Right, which is just a wild question to try and answer academically. And to figure that out, we're going to follow the structural logic of Williams' research.
Right.
We're going to define the actual parameters of this system as laid out in the ancient text, and then look at how historical attempts at financial repression basically mechanically fell short of those parameters.
Yeah, because they always fell short, right?
Exactly. And then we'll examine the three dominant modern financial architectures. So that's the Chinese, European, and American models.
And finally, we'll look at the engineering required to merge those systems and what sort of global event might actually trigger that merger.
Right. It basically requires us to look at ancient texts, 20th century macroeconomic history, and cutting-edge fintech, all through the exact same analytical lens.
Which is such a unique intersection.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we get into the weeds here, we really need to speak directly to you, the listener, and just lay down some crucial ground rules for this discussion.
Yeah, this is important.
Because the source material we are looking at today analyzes commentary from conservative media influencers, alternative media, and right-wing political figures regarding these technologies. So, okay, let's unpack this with complete neutrality. Our deep dive today will neither endorse nor condemn any political viewpoints. And we aren't here to validate or debunk any religious beliefs either.
Right. Our goal is strictly to impartially report on the academic analysis of these cultural conversations and technical frameworks, exactly as they are provided in the source material.
Precisely.
We are looking at the engineering and the architecture and using the ancient text purely as a specification sheet for comparison, nothing more.
So with that framework established, let's look at why this conversation is happening right now. Because, before we analyze if modern tech matches the prophecy, we have to understand the specific parameters of that prophecy and why it's suddenly going viral online.
Right. Where does the baseline for this anxiety actually come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we have to look at the Book of Revelation, specifically chapter 13, verses 11 through 18.
Okay.
This text forms the foundation of the literal, futurist, Christian, eschatological view, and eschatology just being the theology of the end times.
Right.
So the text describes a future system where a totalitarian dictator, commonly known as the Antichrist, forces all people to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead.
And the critical operational detail in the text, the part that Williams really zeroes in on for his financial analysis, is that without this mark, quote, no man might buy or sell.
Exactly. It's incredible to think about the density of that passage. I mean, it is just 52 words long in the King James Version.
Wait, really? Just 52 words?
Just 52 words. But in those words, it sketches out an incredibly specific, globally binding financial payments architecture.
That is wild.
And the author of this paper points out that public anxiety around this 52-word text isn't just a fringe thing anymore. It is completely skyrocketing.
Yeah, the data Williams presents on this is really compelling. The paper utilizes an analysis run through the Claude AI platform to track the digital discourse.
Right.
So the methodology involved searching for 18 specific apocalyptic and technological keywords. They looked for terms like CBDC, which stands for central bank digital currency, the Great Reset, and digital identification.
Alongside theological terms like Antichrist and the Mark of the Beast.
Right, right. And they tracked these mentions across the top 100 conservative media influencers between January 2018 and May 2026.
And they found 331 specific dated mentions tying these concepts together.
Wow.
We aren't talking about obscure forums here. We are talking about major influencers and political figures. The paper explicitly cites people like Glenn Beck, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, and others.
Right. And they are constantly linking things like central bank digital currencies and biometric digital IDs to, well, a total control slavery system or the literal end times.
Exactly. But the most revealing part of that data is the correlation.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at the time series plots in the paper, there's a really striking visual alignment. As these major influencers spiked their mentions of these apocalyptic tech themes, there were corresponding massive spikes in Google Trends data for these exact same terms among the general public.
So they're feeding each other.
Yeah, the influencer discourse and the public search behavior are moving in lockstep, basically creating this massive feedback loop of technological anxiety.
It's a massive hype engine.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a little here because we've seen this kind of technological panic so many times before.
Sure we have.
Are we just seeing the natural human reflex to fear rapid innovation?
Huh.
I mean, think back to the 1970s and 80s. People thought the literal barcode on groceries was evil.
Oh yeah, the barcode panic was huge.
Right. And then there was the panic that the Y2K bug was going to bring about the apocalypse. So is this just barcode panic 2.0, or is there actually a fire under all this smoke this time?
It's a totally fair comparison, but here's where the Y2K and barcode analogies break down. Y2K was a fear of technology failing.
Okay, right.
The anxiety Williams is tracking is the fear of technology succeeding flawlessly.
Oh, wow. That's a huge distinction.
Right. And regarding the barcode, I mean, that was a passive tag on a cereal box. The technology we are talking about today involves active biometric tags on the human being. So Williams isn't trying to predict the end of the world. Instead, he treats those 52 words from the Bible as an immutable 2,000-year-old operational specification sheet.
Like an engineering blueprint.
Exactly. He strips away the allegory and asks a mechanical question. Could today's technology actually build the financial chokehold described in the text?
So to figure out if this is just hype or something more, we really have to move from vague internet fears to a rigorous academic engineering checklist. Like, how do we actually know if a financial system matches the text?
Well, Williams distills the biblical account into 5 minimal operational conditions. If a system doesn't hit all of these, it doesn't fully match the text.
Okay, let's hear them.
Condition 1 is universality. The system must apply globally to the entire economically active population.
So everywhere.
Everywhere. In the limit, no one can opt out, regardless of their nationality or class.
So you bring up a great point about universality there. And honestly, I look at condition 1 and I have to question how feasible that actually is.
Why is that?
Well, because we live in a world that can't even agree on a universal phone charger,
Ah, right.
We have different electrical outlets in every country. So how on earth could a financial system become globally universal without massive fragmentation and major geopolitical holdouts?
That is the big question. The reality of physical borders and the lack of standardization has always been the Achilles heel of total control.
Always.
That friction is exactly what has prevented it historically, which we will analyze shortly. But let's lay out the rest of the framework first.
Sure. What's condition 2?
Condition 2 is binary admit exclude. This means categorical, immediate, and irrevocable exclusion from buying and selling if you are non-compliant. It is an absolute on-off switch for your economic life.
Okay, so it's not just a fine or a minor inconvenience. To ground this for you listening, think about a time you might have been traveling abroad and you tried to buy dinner and your credit card was suddenly declined because the bank's algorithm flagged it as a fraudulent charge.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
Right. You get that sudden stomach-dropping feeling of being totally stranded. You have money, but you have zero purchasing power. Now multiply that feeling by your entire existence. That's the binary admit-exclude condition.
And that total exclusion is exactly why the next condition is so incredibly difficult to engineer. Condition 3 is tamper-evident bearer ID.
What does that mean exactly?
It means the individual must be identified at the point of transaction through a token that is inseparable from them.
Okay, inseparable.
Right. Historically, identity was proven by what you knew, like a password, or what you carried, like a physical card.
Yeah.
But both of those can be stolen, forged, or shared.
Right. I could just give you my password.
Exactly. The specification in the text, a mark on the right hand or forehead, implies a biometric token. You are the ID.
Which makes sense, because if you're trying to lock someone out of the economy, they can't just borrow their friend's digital wallet. The
No.
system has to know it's them standing at the register.
Precisely. So that brings us to condition 4, comprehensive reach. The system must cover all commerce.
All of it.
All of it. It can't just apply to buying a car or a house. It has to apply to retail, the formal banking sector, and crucially, the informal sector.
So no under-the-table cash deals.
Exactly. You can't just pivot to a cash black market. Everything is captured. Finally, we have condition 5, the coercive loyalty test.
Okay, this is the big one.
It is. Commerce is strictly and explicitly conditioned on a declared allegiance to a specific ideological or religious authority.
And this leads to the most critical distinction in the entire paper, I think. The difference between an MOB and an MOP. The paper treats these as entirely different architectural realities.
It is the linchpin of the analysis. A MOB is the full mark of the beast system. It satisfies all 5 conditions, including that final coercive loyalty test to a dictator.
So it's theological.
Yes, it is a theological reality as much as a technological one. MOP, on the other hand, stands for Mark of the Beast Prototype.
A prototype.
Right. A prototype satisfies conditions 1 through 4. It has the universality, the binary exclusion, the tamper-evident ID, and the comprehensive reach. But it lacks the explicit ideological loyalty test.
So MOP is basically a conduct-keyed system.
Exactly.
It restricts buying and selling based on rules, credit scores, sanctions, or compliance. Like, if you don't pay your taxes, you get locked out. But a MOB is a loyalty-keyed system.
That's a great way to put it. Architecturally, though, an MOP and an MOB look absolutely identical.
Really? Identical?
Completely. The engineering required to build them is exactly the same. The line where the engineering ends and the theology begins is entirely contained in that 5th condition.
Man, if we go back to that idea of the universal phone charger, the reality that borders and physical limits always fragment these grand systems, it really makes me wonder about history.
Yeah, how have people tried this before?
Exactly. If we look back, every time a regime tried to pull off a universal financial chokehold, they hit that exact same wall.
Historical systems of financial control always failed for precisely that reason. They hit jurisdictional borders and they hit technological walls.
Right.
The paper rigorously tests several major historical episodes against this 5-condition framework to see how close humanity has gotten in the past.
Okay, let's walk through those because this is fascinating. The paper starts with an American example, right?
Yeah.
FDR's 1933 gold confiscation under Executive Order 6102.
Right. So in 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, the U.S. government essentially forced the surrender of monetary gold.
Just took it.
Basically, yeah. Mechanically, citizens were required to deliver their gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for fiat currency.
Okay, so if we run it through our framework, it satisfies the binary admit-exclude condition, but only for that specific asset class.
Exactly. You were categorically excluded from legally transacting in monetary gold.
But it fails almost everything else on the checklist. It wasn't universal globally, it just applied to the United States. It didn't use a tamper-evident bearer ID at the transaction point, and it definitely didn't have a loyalty test.
Yeah.
It was just a localized macroeconomic policy to prevent the hoarding of gold, right? To stabilize the banking system. It was blunt force.
Blunt force is a really good way to describe early 20th century financial control. The paper then looks at a much darker era, the progressive economic disenfranchisement of European Jews under the Nazi regime.
Right, which was horrifyingly systematic.
It was. The Nazis used complex identity document protocols to enforce economic exclusion, specifically the J-stamped Ken card, which was the basic identity document in use during the Third Reich.
Okay.
Mechanically, they systematically stripped Jewish citizens of their assets, barred them from certain professions, and restricted their ability to buy essential goods.
And it clearly had a devastating comprehensive reach within its territory. Like, it operated on a binary admit-exclude principle.
Yes, very strictly.
But again, when you run it against the 5-condition framework, it hits walls. It wasn't globally universal. And crucially, It failed the tamper-evident ID condition because it relied entirely on paper documents.
Exactly. And paper can be forged, lost, or smuggled.
Right, you could fake a piece of paper.
The technology of the 1930s and 40s simply could not create an inseparable, unforgeable token. You had resistance groups whose entire operation revolved around forging these Ken carts to save lives.
Wow, yeah.
Because identity was tied to a physical piece of paper, the enforcement of the economic exclusion was fundamentally porous.
That makes total sense.
The paper also examines the apartheid divestment movement in the 1980s, which is a fascinating case because it shows that ideological keyed exclusion has a historical precedent.
Wait. That movement targeted corporate entities, right?
It did, yes.
It was about institutional investors pulling money out of South Africa to protest apartheid. It wasn't targeting individual retail commerce, so it fails the comprehensive reach condition. Like you weren't getting blocked from buying a loaf of bread because of divestment.
Correct. But to see how modern state capacity handles sudden individual economic exclusion, the paper points to two critical events in the 2010s. The Cypriot bank haircut in 2013 and the Indian demonetization in 2016. Oh, the Cypriot crisis is fascinating, especially when you dig into the mechanics of a bail-in. Because most of us know about bailouts, right?
Yeah.
Where the government uses taxpayer money to save a failing bank.
Right.
But in Cyprus, they did a bail-in. Can you explain how that actually worked on a mechanical level?
Sure. In 2013, the Cypriot banking sector was on the verge of collapse due to overexposure to Greek debt. So instead of a traditional bailout, the government and the EU agreed to a bail-in.
Okay. What does that mean for a regular person?
Well, over a single weekend, the government mandated a haircut on uninsured bank deposits.
Just a weekend?
One weekend.
Us?
Citizens literally went to sleep on a Friday and woke up on Saturday to find their ATMs frozen.
Oh my gosh.
The banks were closed, online transfers were blocked, and when the dust settled, a significant percentage of the money in their accounts, over 100,000 euros, had simply vanished.
Legally confiscated by the state to recapitalize the banks.
Just imagine the sheer panic of that. You check your banking app and the numbers are just gone, and there is no customer service number you can call to get it back because the state authorized it.
There's nothing you can do.
Then, 3 years later, you have the Indian demonetization. Prime Minister Modi goes on television and announces that at midnight, the two highest denomination banknotes, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, would no longer be legal tender.
And those notes made up 86% of the currency in circulation.
86%. Both of these cases are vital because they demonstrate the raw power of modern state capacity.
Exactly.
They show that governments can execute instantaneous binary financial alterations that affect millions of people instantly. The on-off switch works.
It works flawlessly. But again, referring back to our framework, they were geographically bound.
Right.
The Cypriot bail-in didn't affect accounts in London. The Indian demonetization didn't affect cash in Tokyo, so they failed the universality condition.
There are two other really fascinating historical examples the paper brings up regarding identity and loyalty, right? The Dacian libellus from around 250 CE, and internal passports like the Soviet propiska and the South African dompas.
Yeah. The Dacian libellus is perhaps the closest historical analog we have to the coercive loyalty test.
In Rome, right.
Yes. In 250 CE, Emperor Decius issued an edict requiring all citizens of the Roman Empire to perform a sacrifice to the Roman gods and the emperor's well-being.
And this wasn't just a verbal oath, was it?
No, there was a bureaucratic mechanism. If you perform the sacrifice in front of a magistrate, you were given a papyrus certificate, a libellus.
It was essentially a loyalty receipt.
Yes, a loyalty receipt. And without it, you faced severe persecution, which implicitly meant you couldn't participate in the economic life of the empire.
Wow.
But again, look at the mechanics. It was a piece of papyrus. It was highly forgeable, physically fragile, and limited to the borders of the Roman Empire. The same operational flaws apply to 20th century internal passports like the Soviet propiska or the South African dompas. They were bearer credentials that strictly conditioned your economic and physical movement, but they were paper-based and geographically limited.
So when we look at this historical scorecard, it sounds like past financial repression was like using a blunt, localized axe.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, no historical episode satisfies more than 3 of the 5 conditions. They always fail on global universality, and they always fail on tamper-evident ID because you just can't biologically bind a piece of paper to a human being.
Right, you can always fake paper.
Exactly. So history only ever gave us partial MOPs.
That is the exact conclusion Williams reaches. History lacked the technological capacity to build a true prototype. The engineering required to build an inescapable system simply did not exist.
But as you mentioned earlier, modern tech is attempting to build a laser-guided scalpel.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core of the analysis, examining the financial tech of today to see if it can clear the hurdles that history couldn't.
Okay, let's dive into that.
So the paper breaks the modern world down into three distinct financial architectures.
Right. And I like to think of them conceptually to keep them straight.
Hmm.
So let's start with the Chinese social credit model, which I basically visualize as an omnipresent digital chaperone watching your every move.
Oh, that's a perfect visual.
How does this measure up to the checklist?
Well, the Chinese model is a marvel of deep integration. It takes commercial payment platforms, primarily Alipay and WeChat Pay, which handle the vast majority of daily transactions in China, and overlays them with massive state scoring engines.
So it's not just a bank account.
Not at all. It isn't just about whether you have money in your account. The system pulls data from municipal records, sectoral compliance, social behavior, and vastly scales this data collection with millions of CCTV cameras and advanced biometric capture.
That is terrifyingly robust.
It is, and the enforcement layer then dictates immediate consequences.
So mechanically, if your social credit score drops below a certain threshold because of a minor infraction, like maybe you were caught on a facial recognition camera jaywalking, or you posted something critical online, the algorithm updates your profile.
Instantly.
And when you open WeChat Pay to buy a high-speed train ticket, the system just denies the transaction. The button simply doesn't work.
And that perfectly nails the binary admit-exclude condition. The app simply will not allow the commercial transaction to occur.
Wow.
Furthermore, it nails the tamper-evident ID condition because the payments are heavily anchored by biometrics. You can't just hand your digital wallet to a friend to buy the train ticket for you because the system requires a real-time facial recognition scan to authorize the payment.
So the token is biologically inseparable from the user.
Exactly. And it clearly has comprehensive reach within its borders, covering everything from luxury travel down to buying noodles from a street vendor who only accepts WeChat QR codes.
Right. But it fails universality because it is primarily confined to the jurisdiction of the People's Republic of China. Like, if you leave the country, the chaperone loses his power.
Exactly.
And crucially, it fails the coercive loyalty test. It is a conduct-keyed system based on your behavior and compliance with state rules, not an explicit religious or ideological allegiance oath.
Right. So the Chinese model is a highly advanced partial MOP.
Okay, so let's look at the second architecture, the European CBDC model, specifically the digital euro.
Right.
If China is the omnipresent chaperone, I look at Europe's approach and it feels entirely different. I conceptualize this one as a highly organized, centrally managed toll road where your ID is checked onto gate.
A toll road, I like that.
Because they seem obsessed with privacy on the surface, heavily pushing this IDSIS digital identity framework.
Yeah.
But when you look under the hood, how does it mechanically work?
The European Central Bank digital currency model is structurally different from China's platform-centric approach. A CBDC is centrally issued by the European Central Bank on a common digital ledger.
Right.
However, the ECB doesn't want to deal with individual customer service, so the distribution and onboarding are handled by regulated intermediaries, commercial banks, and payment service providers.
So the ECB mints the digital token, but my local bank in Paris or Berlin actually manages my wallet.
Exactly. And a key mechanical component here is the integration with IDES, the European Digital Identity Framework.
Okay, how does that fit in?
To get a digital euro wallet, you must undergo rigorous KYC and Eurosystem checks, binding your government-issued digital identity to your wallet address.
Okay, running it through the framework, it hits binary admit-exclude because the central ledger and those intermediaries have the absolute power to freeze a wallet. Like if you are sanctioned, the toll road gate comes down.
It comes down hard.
And it hits tamper-evident ID through that IDA digital ID integration, which utilizes device biometrics like Face ID or fingerprint sensors on your smartphone. And the paper says it has partial comprehensive reach right now because physical cash still exists and offline use is still a factor, though the trend is heavily toward digital.
And just like the Chinese model, it fails universality because it's limited to the Eurozone, and it completely fails the loyalty test. The digital euro is ultimately just a programmable financial instrument.
Okay, so finally we have the American DeFi or decentralized finance model.
Yes.
This is a very different beast.
Yeah.
If the Chinese system is a chaperone and the European system is a toll road, The American system feels like a Wild West frontier, an open desert.
Ah, a desert, yeah.
But it relies entirely on heavily armed sheriffs guarding the borders, making sure they know exactly who is coming and going.
The Wild West analogy is really apt for the core technology. The core ledger layer in DeFi relies on permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin or Ethereum.
Right.
There is no central issuer, no central server, and theoretically, anyone can generate a cryptographic wallet address and transact without asking for permission.
But the paper points out that this permissionless core is surrounded by a heavily regulated perimeter. Like, you can't just pay your taxes or buy groceries with raw Bitcoin easily. You have to convert it back to fiat currency, like US dollars.
And that conversion is where the sheriffs step in. To get your fiat currency into the blockchain or to pull it out, you almost always have to pass through centralized exchanges like Coinbase or Kraken, or use centralized stablecoins like USDC.
And this perimeter is heavily guarded by strict KYC and AML anti-money laundering regulations.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets fascinating, because the open desert isn't actually private. The paper mentions analytics firms like Chainalysis. How do they actually police a decentralized network?
They use blockchain forensics. On a public ledger like Bitcoin, every single transaction is permanently recorded and visible to everyone.
Everyone can see it.
Yes. So the forensic firms track what are called UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs. They can basically trace the flow of funds from one anonymous wallet to another, hopping across the blockchain.
Okay, I'm following.
The moment one of those anonymous wallets interacts with a regulated centralized exchange to cash out, the exchange is required by law to have the user's real-world identity on file.
So the sheriff just follows the footprints in the sand until the bandit walks into a regulated bank, and then they just cross-reference the identity.
Precisely. So running American DeFi through the framework, it obviously fails the loyalty test, and the paper says it only partially meets the other four conditions.
Because the core ledger itself is open and permissionless, the exclusion isn't perfectly binary. Right?
Exactly. You can still theoretically transact peer-to-peer in the desert, even if the on- and off-ramps are blocked.
But for participating in the broader economy, exclusion from the perimeter is functionally devastating.
It is.
So if we look at these three architectures in isolation, none of them independently form a complete prototype, a MOP. They all have geographical limits, but all three of them have successfully solved the great historical hurdle: tamper-evident ID. Through facial recognition in China, IADS in Europe, and cryptographic keys tied to KYC at the American perimeter, the issue of forged paper documents is functionally dead.
It's completely dead.
You cannot forge a biological signature the way you forged a Ken cart in 1943.
The historical hurdle of identity has absolutely been cleared, but, it raises a deeply unsettling prospect regarding the other major historical hurdle: physical borders.
Oh.
Because if none of these individual systems form a prototype on their own, what happens if these three distinct flavors of finance start talking to each other?
And this is where the paper drops its most startling finding. Williams points out that an integrated combination of these three architectures, the chaperone, the toll road, and the sheriffs, fully satisfies 4 of the 5 conditions right now.
Right now. That is the core inference of the entire academic paper. For decades, people assumed that a global financial control system required a single, monolithic global currency, a one-world money.
Yeah, that's what everyone always thought.
But Williams demonstrates that we don't need a single currency to achieve the universality condition. We just need the regional systems to be interoperable.
Wow.
We need them to be able to instantly share data and respect each other's block lists. And the plumbing for that interoperability is already being laid.
But I want to really dig into the how here.
Yeah.
Because how do these wildly different systems actually sync up in practice? Will there just be some invisible financial translation app running in the background of our phones that instantly freezes my American stablecoin because of a social credit violation in Beijing?
It sounds like sci-fi, but
I mean, how does a decentralized American ledger structurally talk to a Chinese state scoring engine?
it happens through APIs, application programming interfaces, and unified global messaging standards. Let's talk about the actual mechanics.
Please do.
Financial institutions worldwide are currently adopting a standard called ISO 2022. It is a highly structured, data-rich messaging language for financial transactions. Whether you are a central bank in Europe, a commercial bank in New York, or a payment platform in Asia, if you are using ISO 2022, your systems are speaking the exact same digital language.
So the data handshake is totally standardized.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The paper highlights initiatives like Project Agora, which is spearheaded by the Bank for International Settlements, and they are actively building the technical infrastructure for cross-border CBDC interoperability.
If they're building the bridge.
They are creating shared ledgers and programmable compliance checks. All three architectures support identity binding at the bearer level. All three support compliance data exchange across borders through these APIs, and all three support transaction-level surveillance.
So let's play out a scenario here. Let's say a global governing body updates a unified international sanctions list, or a global compliance API flags a specific digital identity for a severe violation.
Okay, tracking.
Because of this shared API infrastructure and standardized messaging, the European toll road, the Chinese chaperone, and the American sheriffs all receive that updated block list at the exact same millisecond.
That is the mechanical reality, yes. If your biometric identity is tied to that flag profile, the American centralized exchange freezes your on-ramp and seizes your stablecoins.
Right.
The European Commercial Bank suspends your digital euro wallet, and the Chinese payment platform denies your QR code scan at the local market.
Oh, wow.
You are categorically, immediately excluded from the global financial system, regardless of which architecture you happen to be using at that moment, and regardless of what currency you are trying to spend.
Which means the engineering distance to a Mark of the Beast prototype, a system that satisfies conditions 1 through 4, is smaller today than at any prior point in human history.
Exactly. The remaining gap to a MOP is no longer technological. The technology is sitting right there on the shelf, fully operational.
It's already built.
The APIs are written, the biometric sensors are literally in our pockets. The only things preventing these regional systems from snapping together into a truly universal, inescapable global network are political borders, statutory regulations, and the lack of a unified global will to actually activate it.
Which is terrifyingly fragile when you think about it. The tech is just waiting on the politics.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the final core topic of Williams' paper. Crises as catalysts, or accelerationism.
Right. What flips the switch?
Yeah. If the plumbing for a global prototype already exists, what would actually push the fragmented governments of the world and the global population to turn the valve and activate it universally? I mean, governments generally don't yield sovereignty easily.
They don't, and populations generally don't yield privacy and freedom without a compelling reason either.
True.
So the paper explores the concept of crisis pathway accelerationism. It references strategic forecasting exercises, such as the Rockefeller Foundation's 2010 lockstep scenario.
What was that about?
It basically explored how a severe global pandemic could lead to tighter top-down government control, more authoritarian leadership, and intensified surveillance.
Okay, so Williams talks about a polycrisis, overlapping, cascading global emergencies that could trigger the rapid implementation of this MOP architecture,
Right.
basically bypassing normal legislative gridlock. Let's walk through the specific pathways he identifies. First, health crises.
Well, a severe, highly lethal global health crisis fundamentally alters the balance between privacy and public safety. It fast-tracks the mass adoption of biometric digital IDs and contact tracing networks.
Right.
If movement and commerce are deemed imminent public health hazards, access to physical and digital markets gets inextricably linked to your verified real-time health status. We saw the absolute precursor to this architecture during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly. Think about how fast we all adopted QR code menus, digital vaccine passports, and movement tracking apps.
It happened overnight.
It did. It didn't take a global dictator to force that upon us. It just took a crisis, fear, and the desire to be allowed back into a restaurant or onto an airplane.
Exactly.
What about financial crises?
Well, if the legacy commercial banking system faces a catastrophic systemic collapse, perhaps triggered by commercial real estate defaults or sovereign debt crises, central banks could use that panic to fundamentally rewire the system.
Oh, so?
They could bypass commercial banks entirely to distribute emergency relief funds directly to citizens via retail CBDCs. And once that direct-to-citizen CBDC architecture is in place, it becomes the permanent bedrock of the economy. It also allows for programmable money, where the state could mechanically implement deeply negative interest rates to force spending or restrict the purchase of certain assets to prevent capital flight during the crisis.
Then he mentions geopolitical and security crises.
Right. In the event of a major global conflict, a sophisticated cyber warfare campaign taking down payment grids, or a massive spike in global terrorism, the immediate governmental response is to expand sanctions and account freezing networks.
So they just clamp down.
Hard. The compliance APIs and standardized messaging we discussed earlier would be instantly weaponized and hardened. Governments would demand a zero-trust, identity-bound payment rail to ensure not a single dollar was funding the adversary.
And that drives mass adoption.
Exactly. Mass adoption of the MOP architecture, all under the banner of national security.
And finally, climate crises. This one is incredibly relevant to the discourse happening right now.
It really is. The paper points out that severe, escalating climate emergencies could promote the mass integration of ESG, environmental, social, and governance scoring directly into individual retail commerce.
Oh man, imagine opening your banking app on a Friday night. You get a call about a family emergency and you urgently need to buy a plane ticket.
Okay.
You select the flight, go to checkout, and the purchase button is just grayed out. A notification pops up saying your household has exceeded its monthly carbon allotment because you bought too much red meat and drove too much earlier in the month.
It sounds wild, but
That isn't science fiction. The APIs and the data structures to do that exist today. It's tying personal carbon allowances directly to the binary admit-exclude mechanism.
And that is the accelerationist theory in a nutshell. Democratic guardrails, constitutional privacy protections, and legislative gridlock are currently what prevent these regional systems from fully integrating into a global MOP.
Right.
But during a polycrisis, those guardrails are often willingly dismantled by populations who are eager to trade their privacy and economic freedom for security, stability, or just basic survival.
That is the underlying tension of this whole deep dive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are we just casually sleepwalking into this architecture through the pursuit of convenience? Like, is a massive, catastrophic global emergency the only realistic way a MOP gets universally adopted? Or are we going to build it ourselves piece by piece just because we want one-click checkouts and zero credit card fraud?
Honestly, it is highly likely to be a combination of both. Yeah. Crises accelerate the legal frameworks and mandate the integration, but the baseline consumer demand for frictionless, secure digital experiences actively builds the technological infrastructure during peacetime.
That's a great point.
You are voluntarily providing the biometric anchors to the system every time you use facial recognition to unlock your banking app or authorize a digital payment. The system is being built from the bottom up by consumer preference and connected from the top down by global compliance standards.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've been on quite a journey today, connecting the theology of ancient texts with 20th century economic history and the hidden API plumbing of modern financial technology. Let's sort of summarize exactly what we've learned from Michael R. Williams' paper.
Well, we started by looking at the literal biblical text of Revelation 13, which specifies a globally binding system of commerce requiring a mark without which no one can buy or sell. We distilled that 52-word text into a rigorous 5-condition operational framework: universality, binary admit-exclude, tamper-evident bearer ID, comprehensive reach, and a coercive loyalty test.
And we found that while the actual mark of the beast, the MOB, requires a coercive theological loyalty test to a dictator, the engineering prototype for that system, the MOP, is essentially already sitting on the shelf, fully operational.
Exactly. When we looked at historical motives at financial control, from FDR's gold confiscation to Nazi Ken carts, the South African Dompas, and even the Cypriot bail-ins, they all failed to meet the framework.
It just didn't have the tools.
They lacked the technology for tamper-evident IDs and the reach for global universality. They were fundamentally constrained by the physical limitations of paper and borders.
But today's technology doesn't have those constraints. We have the Chinese social credit surveillance acting as the chaperone, European digital identity and CBDCs acting as the toll road, and American blockchain compliance tools acting as the sheriffs.
Right.
Individually, they're just isolated puzzle pieces. But integrated together through standardized APIs and ISO messaging, they form a nearly complete Mark of the Beast prototype. Today's tech lacks only the unified political will to flip the switch, which a global polycrisis could easily provide.
Because the remaining gap is ideological and statutory, not technological. The engineering distance to a system capable of absolute global economic exclusion is shorter today than at any point in human history.
So as a listener, what should you actually take away from this?
I think the main takeaway is to just maintain a sharp, critical awareness of the digital conveniences you use every single day.
Absolutely.
The next time you tap your phone to pay for groceries or use your face to unlock a digital wallet, realize that you are utilizing the modular pieces of a system that ancient texts could only describe in apocalyptic terms. It's not about panicking, and it's not about throwing your phone in the ocean. It's about deeply understanding the architecture you are willingly participating in. It really is a profound call for digital literacy and civic awareness. Understanding how these systems integrate behind the scenes is the first and most vital step in ensuring that democratic guardrails remain in place, even in the face of a crisis.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive.
Well, let's hear it.
We talked a lot about polycrises forcing the system upon us through fear, right? But think back to the absolute convenience of your digital wallet. If a fully integrated Mark of the Beast prototype was offered to you tomorrow, not with a coercive loyalty test, not handed down by a dictator, but simply marketed as a frictionless, unhackable, universal payment system that permanently guaranteed you would never, ever be a victim of identity theft, bank fraud, or a frozen account again, would the vast majority of humanity voluntarily line up to opt in long before anyone ever had to force them?